It's 100% eclipsed. And you go another 100 miles away from that on the moon surface, and it's 98, 97, 96% eclipse. So uh,
Mm.
expect that as this eclipse. Now that the umbral eclipse is underway, umbral eclipse means that now in the upper left, if you're standing on the moon, you have no sun at all. Only Earth shadow is striking the moon. So the official partial eclipse, the umbral eclipse, has begun.
Yeah, it's a great moment. It's extraordinary, not just to see in the live pictures, but you can go out now and actually see this moment as you sort of as it's really starting to descend into that darkness. You've actually now properly lost the top left corner, haven't we, of the moon now?
Yes, yes. People wonder, how does this differ from the phases of the moon? I'm always surprised that there's a number of people who think that the ordinary crescent moon is only a crescent because it's partially in Earth shadow. And they think that a half moon is half in Earth shadow every month. And of course, that's not true. The moon is actually casting its shadow on itself. It's a curved body, and half of it is in sunlight, half of it is in darkness at a given time. But now we're actually seeing phases that don't look like your normal phases of the moon. So if you like the weird, the unusual, the odd, if you'll pay for that by going to the strangest movies that you can find because you like to see something you haven't seen before, again, bring your friends, call your friends, girlfriend, lovers, kids, parents, even. Drag them out for this thing because here it goes. It's underway.
And you talk about weird and unusual things. For me, it's got to be that moment when the moon is deep in the heart of the Earth's shadow, and yet it shows these beautiful colours. I mean, why is that? It's that beautiful thing, that the same reason why our skies are blue, and this weird combination of that effect and the fact that the Earth's atmosphere bends the light. I just think that's incredible. I know you're going to talk loads more about it later on the show when it actually happens, but that to me is one of the real magical things of a lunar eclipse.
You're so right, Will. And you know, in a way, it's already happening because Earth casts a reddish shadow. Now, there's no way around it. And yet, you look at the upper left, either with your eye right now, if you're going outside, or at our SLU telescope live views of the moon, and the shadow looks black. But in truth, it's really red. The only reason it looks black, either to the eye or to our equipment, is because we're taking the correct exposure for the moon itself. And so will your eye. If you go out and look at it, you don't have to think about it. Your eye adjusts. The pupil changes its size. The retina actually has photochemical changes. And your eye adjusts to capture the correct exposure for the moon. And since the moon is still mostly in sunlight, either with film, with CCDs, with our telescope now, or with your eye, the correct exposure for the moon means that you have to stop down that shadow part. So we're
Mm.
underexposing it. Our eyes underexpose it, and here it's SLU. We're underexposing the shadow. We could do it. We could change the exposure and bring you the true red color of Earth's shadow even now. But to do that, we'd have to so overexpose the sunlit part of the moon that it would be just burnt out and blurry and it wouldn't look clear anymore. So we're always doing the correct exposure to capture the best view. And to do that, it's underexposing the shadow. But there'll come a time later in the eclipse, I think around 10 o'clock Eastern time, another half an hour or so from now, when so little of the moon will remain that its brightness will be low enough that the correct exposure for your eye and for our equipment will open up the exposure enough to show the red color of the shadow. And one of
Mm.
the weird, interesting parts of the eclipse is, what is the moment when we distinctly see the true reddish color, what the media calls the blood moon? When will the blood moon start appearing? And we're going to
We
be
need
watching for that.
we need to name for it, don't we, Bob? We were discussing that the other day. We need a name like we have when a solar eclipse. We have that beautiful moment, the diamond ring and Bailey's beads, which herald the beginning of totality. I think maybe some slew viewers can give their
That's
opinions, ideas on the hashtag.
the hemogenesis. How's that?
Yes, I like it. I like it.
Hemogenesis. We're waiting for, well, let's be the first to start using that. We're waiting for the hemogenesis, the moment when the moon turns red, when the shadow turns red. Meantime, look at that moon continuing to rush into the
Yeah.
shadow. The speed of the moon about 2,280 miles per hour. Not terribly fast as such things go. Earth travels at 66,000 miles per hour. If you're in the part of the world that uses the metric system, which is essentially everywhere except for the United States, think of Earth going about 100,000 kilometers per hour, a little over that, and the moon moving a mere 3,700 kilometers per hour, much slower, but it's fast enough to move its own width per hour. And then that means that in 1 hour, it'll go from having just touched the moon's edge to being fully immersed. And if you look at the eclipse timings, sure enough, this partial eclipse began at, I'll use Eastern time for the moment, at about 9:07, and the total part begins at 10:11, just 1 hour and 4 minutes later. So it all makes sense. It's great for things to make sense in the universe. Certainly there's enough chaos here on Earth, and that's one of the great things about astronomy. It's all very clockwork, tick-tock, logical, sensible. You can count on it.
Yeah, absolutely can. That's the beauty of it.
So weird things about the moon. You know, in this segment, let's just each give a favorite strange thing about the moon, since the eclipse is so odd. I'll go first. I think my favorite thing is that when the moon is struck by a large meteor, or when it got hit by a descent stage, an unused descent stage in the Apollo mission, it started shaking like a giant gong. It rang for as much as 2.5 hours without stopping. On Earth, when we get clobbered, our vibrations dampen out in just a minute or two at most. But on the moon, it keeps going wah, 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 like a giant gong, and rings, shakes, vibrates for hours, which seems to indicate it has, unlike Earth with our liquid molten core, although the solid, the very middle of the Earth is solid, the moon must have a solid crystalline core that translates vibrations back and forth, and the whole thing rings like a bell. I love that. How about you? What's a favorite moon factoid for you, Will?
Well, you know me, Bob. I'm an astrophotographer. I love taking pictures of the moon. And one of the cool things I think about the moon is we always think of it as being this sort of monochrome object, black and white, right, without any color. But actually, the color, the actual surface, has some very, very subtle surface color variations that you can actually bring out naturally. I mean, you can enhance them, obviously, in Photoshop and programs like that. But those colors actually are there, and they correspond to real geological differences between different portions of the moon. So you get some really titanium-rich lunar seas that are very blue, and when you bring out that color, it really does come out blue. So yeah, if you think that the moon is monochrome, well, there's very subtle color variations.
It's awfully subtle, I will say that. You know, the Apollo astronauts had color film, and it looked to me like, but that shows you're the photographer, I'm not. It looked to me that they were wasting their color film there because, I mean, look at it. It's
Yeah.
pretty. It looks pretty black and white. So good
From
for
the
you
surface.
that you have the eye to see these subtle differences.
Well, you have to bring them out. You have to bring them out on camera. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the surface, the Apollo astronauts, wasn't it that they described it as sort of being like sooty, really dark, charcoaly color, and we think of it as beautiful, silvery. So look at that silvery moon. That's extraordinary. But
My goodness, this is so great. I'd love to go on and on, but I know here at SLU we have so many different segments. We have a taped
yes,
interview with the Vatican astronomer. I mean, can you believe it? We're going to be talking about lore and legend and the way our atmosphere changes the colors. And during all this time to come, for hours, we're going to be with this. We're going to watch the moon now as it creeps closer and closer. We have our countdown clock ticking away towards totality, but forget about totality being the be all and end all. The whole thing is wonderful and weird and odd. And look at that phase. Now, this doesn't look like a shape that you'd ever see in any normal lunar month, right?
no,
And and
no,
and so I urge all of you, just as Will just did, go out if you have clear skies, take a look at it yourself, stick with us, and we'll keep telling you very cool things about it. We'll be back a little bit later to talk some more about this. Thank you for joining us. We're continuing for hours. Don't go away for our mega harvest moon eclipse, the last one for the next 18 years or so. This is Will. I'm Bob here at SLU. We'll be back. Stick with us. Hi, Bob Berman back with you here on our special total lunar eclipse night. Wow, special night. Lunar perigee, the closest moon, the harvest moon. But what is all this moon stuff? Why is the moon so important? After all, it's a celestial body only 1/4 our size. It's really geologically dead. It has no life. It has no air. Other than the fact that it's nearby, only 1/4 miles away. Certainly, we can think of many celestial objects that are more interesting. So why does it have all of this historical and scientific and cultural importance? Well, there's a lot of things. Everything since discovery of that it came about by an object colliding with Earth about 4 billion years ago. That bam, the combination of this Mars-sized object and our own planet produced the moon. We've had it, and it's slowly been spiraling away ever since then, at the rate of about 1.5 inches a year, slowly leaving us. So it's getting smaller and smaller in our sky. Still, what's the big deal? Well, scientifically, first off, we've recently found that it's not just a matter of the moon producing tides, which it does, in which some forms of animal life, especially in the intertidal marshes, the animals like crabs and others that depend on the seas rising and falling, and their predators like gulls. Beyond that, it turns out that all life on Earth would have probably been impossible without the moon. That's because the moon stabilizes Earth's axial tilt. Right now we're tilted about 23.5 degrees. And it's been calculated that without the moon, we would slowly undergo wild changes in where our tilt points, so that we would sometimes be pointed directly toward the sun, which would make everything too hot for many thousands of years at a time. It would be broiling. Life could not exist. But with the moon, that tilt stays at very nearly 23.5 degrees. It only gets more than that or less than that by about 2 degrees. So it stabilizes our conditions and probably allows life to exist in the first place. So the moon's absolutely vital. And maybe all the different cultures and civilizations through the ages not only sense that, but, well, one thing for sure is they knew about the tides. When the moon is full, as it is tonight, or new, um, it lines up with the sun. Even though the lunar tides by themselves are more than twice as powerful as the sun's, the two can either subtract from each other or add to each other. Tonight, when it's full, they add to each other, producing spring tides, which has nothing to do with the season of spring. It just means that the waters come up higher. The highs are higher, the lows are lower. It's as if it's all springing out at us, or maybe springing like a water spring on the earth. More water is what is the result of that. So the moon is totally important in terms of that, and regulates this kind of life. And the ancients all knew that. They also had this fascination with the moon because of its brilliance in the night sky. Although, to tell you the truth, it's less bright than most people imagine. Let me test you out on that. If you were to be asked, what is the difference between sunlight and moonlight? How many times brighter is a sunlit scene than the same scenery at night lit up by the full moon? What would you say? Do you think sunlight is 100 times greater than moonlight? 1,000 times? Very few people would guess that it's 450,000 times. About 500,000 times fainter than sunlight. And the reason we don't perceive that is because there are photochemical changes in our eyes. It's not just the changing pupils of our eyes, but the retinas themselves change their sensitivity. So we don't really perceive this huge difference in brightness between the sun and the moon. Nonetheless, the moon Hi, I'm back. This is Bob Urban, and this is SLU for our great lunar total eclipse. And right now, I'd like to talk to you about whether the world is coming to an end, because there's a lot of web traffic and a lot of reasons that people think it is. And it is a pretty amazing night. What's happening tonight? I mean, think about it. It's the harvest moon and the closest approach of the moon of the entire year. At the moment the eclipse is happening, the moon is turning color. It's a tetrad. There's Bible references that are involved. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are making some people afraid of what's going on. So let's talk about that. You know, it's not just moons that cause it. For some reason in the astronomy world, we have all sorts of end of the world Armageddon type experiences almost every year. Some people think there's a hidden planet named Nibiru that's on a collision course and it's going to collide today during the eclipse. Others think it's later this year or next year, but you'll see a lot on the web about that. In truth, no, NASA and the world's astronomers are not hiding some cataclysm. I've been connected with astronomy all my life, and I can tell you that these are blabbermouths. Astronomers would never keep anything hidden. They couldn't if there was something actually happening. Also, if there's a planet really on a collision course with us, it would already be noticeable because at this point it would be close enough to be seen in the sky by everyone. So that's not happening, and the yearly asteroids that come close to us are comets that are visible every few years, and all of these end of the world things. I mean, haven't we learned by now? They don't happen. But this event is a little different because this lunar eclipse is a confluence of so many different things happening at once. The closest moon of the year, the largest moon, the harvest moon, what's called a mega moon, all occurring at once, and something called a tetrad that we'll get to in a few minutes. But let's start with what the media are labeling this, and that is the blood moon. They've been calling total lunar eclipses blood moons for a few years, and there's a little bit of truth behind it because the moon is turning a ruddy color, reddish. In reality, though, the color is more like a penny. It's coppery or orange, more orange than red. If your blood ever turns the color of tonight's eclipse moon, you should go to the emergency room because that's not a good sign. The real drama comes in because that illusion, that term blood moon, feeds into some Bible passages such as Revelations 6:12, where it says, "And I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood." Or Joel 2:31, which says, "The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and the terrible day of the Lord come." So that suggests doomsday, Armageddon. And that feeds right in with the blood business. So naturally, people are afraid. There's even some Bible sites that I've noticed asking questions. There's one that says, "Is Jesus going to return during the blood red moon of 2015?" And that's tonight. So that's what's scaring some people. And then on top of that, we've got the mega moon business. Now, the moon's orbit around Earth is an ellipse, not a circle, so the moon comes closer and farther all the time. And once every single year, you're going to get a full moon that happens to be the closest moon of that year. And this year, it's now. And it's happening just as the eclipse is happening. During the eclipse, the moon will be at its closest point to Earth of all of 2015 and be at its largest of all of 2015. I think that's very cool. So the question is, does that affect us? Does that harm us? It does affect us because we will have the largest tides of 2015. The highs will be higher, the lows will be lower. than any time this year because, first of all, it's full moon, and the full moon and the new moon both produce the highest tides because the moon and the sun are then in a straight line, and they act together to raise the tides. And secondly, when you have a perigee, and that's what it's called when the moon is close, and it is close to us, its nearest surface to us is only 216,000 miles tonight. That is quite close. And that additionally raises the tides because the tidal effect varies with the cube of distance. Some places like the Bay of Fundy in Canada, in Nova Scotia, are even more susceptible to the moons coming closer and further than it is to the new moon and the full moon. So the combination of those two, yeah, we're going to have tides, so it really will affect us. But as for mega moon, which is a new expression, astronomers don't use it. It's just newly coined, mega moon. And so what does that mean exactly? Well, if you look at the data, it shows that tonight's moon is 14% larger and closer than the full moon in early March this year, or 7% larger than its average size. Now, does that mean it'll be large in the sky? Actually not, because that difference is right on the edge of what you could notice. The moon is only 30 arc minutes across. 14% change is right on the border of what human eyesight can show. So marginally noticeable. What you will see is if you watch it rise. If you've already seen it rise or in your place where you can watch it rise, like on the West Coast, for example, California, Oregon, Washington, the moon is rising already eclipsed tonight. So it will be low when you see it, especially in the early parts of the eclipse. And when the moon is down low near the skyline, it always looks enormous. This is the famous moon illusion. All objects in the sky near the horizon look large. Even constellations like Orion or the Big Dipper look huge when they're low. And this is caused by the psychological effect of knowing, as we do without thinking about it, that anything near the horizon is far away. Like if we're driving and we go over a hill and there's a town in the distance and we see a church steeple in it, we'll automatically assign a size to that because we know it's far away and we give it some perspective. When the moon is high in the sky, it's dwarfed by the emptiness of the sky. The sky is 180 degrees from horizon to horizon. It's large, and the moon is only half a degree across, so it looks tiny when it's high up. But when we see it down low, juxtaposed against earthly objects, the moon takes on a much larger size. That's called the moon illusion. It doesn't actually get larger. If you measured it with a filar micrometer, you'd see that its diameter is actually no larger. It's actually a little smaller when it's near the horizon because it's farther away from you than when it's high up in the sky. But the illusion is very powerful. So everybody seeing the moon rise tonight, are going to say, wow, look at that. That's the mega moon. That's the huge moon that they're talking about. But not really. It's enormous because that's the moon illusion. The fact that it is a close moon and is called the mega moon adds a tiny bit to that, but not enough to be noticeable. Certainly not enough to affect us. The tides will be high because of this, but to actually cause flooding or damage, you'd need something extra, like onshore winds or a storm, something extra to push it over the edge, and then you could have some damage from today's event. So that's not going to bring you Armageddon either. The other aspect is the tetrad. Now, tetrad's an interesting concept. You see, you can have an eclipse, a lunar eclipse or any kind of eclipse, every 6 months. So if you have a lunar eclipse and it's total, the next lunar eclipse 6 months later can be anything. It can be penumbral, which is not even noticeable. The moon doesn't seem to change. It can be partial, or rarely it can be another total eclipse 6 months later. Well, once in a long time, it will be total again, and 6 months later it'll be total again, and 6 months later it'll be total again. So you have 4 total eclipses in a row. Every 6 months, another total lunar eclipse. That's called a tetrad. They were very rare for centuries. There was not a single tetrad from the year 1600 to the year 1900. None at all. But now it's different. In the 21st century, there are 8 tetrads. So we can't really say that it's a honestly rare thing during our lifetimes right now. So yes, it's a tetrad eclipse. This is the final one of the tetrad, by the way. We had one earlier this year on April 15th. We had 2 last year. This is the final one in this series. So that's kind of cool, but it's not the doomsday. And we do have the harvest moon tonight that's happening at the same time. That's always the nearest full moon to the September equinox. When have we ever seen that go into eclipse? Maybe once before if we're old enough to remember it, but that's kind of rare. So it's a rare event. It's a cool event. We're covering it here at SLU. We're very excited about it. But as for the end of the world, I don't think so. But we'll find out as we keep watching it tonight. We'll see if we're still around in another couple of hours. I'd wager that we will be. So let's keep watching. Let's keep enjoying this. For SLU, I'm Bob Berman. Hey, this is Slew. I'm Bob Berman, back with you live. Well, the whole thing is live. Everything we are seeing is in real time. We are watching the blood moon. We've reached hemogenesis, the start of the blood part of the moon, the red part of the moon. It looked like a black bite taken out of the moon until just a little while ago. But if you check outside your window, and you're one of the places in the world that can see this in your sky, which is not, unfortunately, Hawaii or Alaska or Asia, but it is mainland U.S., all of South America, Western Europe, and the western half of Africa. If you have clear skies, what are you waiting for? Go out, check it out. Don't be out too long, though. Stay with us because we have so much to explore. Totality is coming up now in only a little bit more than 9 minutes. And I should mention that unlike a total solar eclipse, where it happens at different times for different people around the world, because the moon's shadow then sweeps across Earth, and some parts of Earth that are going to get it will see it well underway or even see the total eclipse, while others are still waiting for it to start, and it hasn't even begun yet. Not here. With a lunar eclipse, everybody sees the same thing. It's really a unifying event. It's one of the reasons we decided to talk to the Vatican astronomer, and we'll do that a little bit later on. The Pope is visiting the U.S. So this is the kind of event that unites the world, seeing this. After all, it's Earth, it's the moon, it's our planet, and so much of the world is watching this at the same time. It's really a unifying thing. We're all seeing it, and again, I'll emphasize it, we're all seeing the same thing. As long as you have the moon in your sky right now, you're seeing the exact same part of the eclipse as everybody else. The only difference is that if you happen to be standing on your head, if you're in South America, in Brazil, let's say, where the eclipse is underway, although we understand from some of our Brazil friends that it's cloudy in at least parts of Brazil. But if you're in the clear, you'll see the moon in a different orientation because you're, of course, upside down relative to people here in the northern hemisphere. So that's the only difference. But the moon, other than that, the stage of the eclipse will be identical. And as we approach totality, we want to bring back our friend Scott from the Weather Network. This is Canada's equivalent of the Weather Channel in the United States. And Scott is an expert not just on meteorology. He's been keeping it in check and hopefully keeping the clouds away, when he's doing a good job of that for most of us. But Scott, we're also going to talk about these odd so-called edge effects caused by the fact that the redness is not uniform. It's odd, it's uneven, it's caused by our atmosphere. What's up with that? What's going on here?
Well, basically, the darkest part of the atmosphere, at least when you're looking at it edge on, is the lowest part, the troposphere, which is where most of our weather occurs. And if you look at this edge on, like say from the International Space Station, and their views of it, you can see this quite often, is that it's red at the bottom, and then there's a sort of a whitish pink layer in the middle, and then it goes off to blue at the top. And exactly, right there on the screen. So that's a picture of the Space Shuttle Endeavour from, I believe, 2007, taken from the International Space Station. And you can see the layers very clearly there. So that's the orangish-red troposphere at the bottom. Then you have the stratosphere in the middle and the mesosphere above that on top with blue. Now, the blue seems to mainly come from the fact that ozone absorbs specific wavelengths of light. And so it will pick out the reds, and so you'll only get the blue coming through when you're looking at it edge on like that. And as the light filters through the atmosphere, because the globe is curved, this acts like a lens, and all of that light gets beamed into the umbra, because the umbra itself is just a dark blank patch of light because the Earth is physically blocking the sun. But because of this focusing, the lens of the atmosphere focuses all that light, the different stratified layers of color, into the umbra. And the very center of it turns into a big circle of reddish orange, coppery color, as you mentioned. And that's what we mostly see when we see a full total lunar eclipse, is that red. And as it enters the umbra and it leaves the umbra, sometimes you can catch that bluish tinge from the ozone absorption. And it's not often. It's hard to pick it out. There are pictures on the internet that people have seen, that have posted up. But yeah, this creates sort of almost like a banding around the edges of the umbra of these other colors. And if
Okay.
you can watch
So-
really
so
closely,
for-
if you can get a
for-
really close picture of it, you can see that.
Okay, so for our listeners, let's translate that. Umbra means Earth's dark part of the shadow. That's the part of our
Right.
shadow where no sunlight is hitting the moon. And
That's right.
what Scott is telling us is that our atmosphere is being bent, refracted onto the moon. Actually, what we're getting on the moon, the reddish color, is really the combination of all of Earth's sunrises and sunsets. Very lovely,
Yes.
poetic idea being combined into a single kind of light. And the uneven color, as he's explaining, is due to these effects. Now, as the eclipse reaches its total part, and we only have 4 minutes to go before that happens, either look outside or join us with our many feed partners and our main telescope in the Canary Islands and take a look at the color of the moon. Note how uneven it is, and this is what Scott is talking about, these different parts of the atmosphere that are throwing light onto the moon. Let's see if we can see any. He said that there's occasions when it's blue. I've never seen that in 50 years of looking at the moon. Honestly speaking, I don't think we're going to see any blue. I think any photographs of that, the web, you can show photographs of a hippopotamus flying on the web. So I wouldn't trust any colors, but let us be the observers and decide for ourselves without bias. Let's look on the moon and see what colors we see. Now, is it really the color of blood? The media is calling this a blood moon. I think you'd have to go to the emergency room if your blood ever turned this color. Scott, have you ever gotten a cut and seen your blood turn this color?
No, I haven't. It's a little bit darker than that, a lot more reddish than that coppery orangish tinge.
Good. So that's right.
Yeah.
Coppery, orange, maybe yellows. There's some white there. And when we reach totality, that's 3 minutes away now. Right now, we're still seeing sunlight hitting one edge of the moon. And you can look for yourself when you're outside. This looks so weird. It doesn't look like any kind of lunar phase. It doesn't look like a normal crescent moon. It looks like a little spot of sunlight, and all the rest of the moon is uneven because it's getting different degrees of depth into the umbra. The moon, in fact, in this particular eclipse, the moon is not passing centrally into Earth's shadow, but will be on the south edge of the shadow. So we expect, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Scott, that the top of the moon, the northern edge of the moon, will be the darkest. That'll be most centrally in the
Yes.
umbra. The bottom should
That's
be the
right.
lightest, maybe yellow, maybe different colors. Plus, it's going to change as the eclipse goes on, because once the moon is fully in our shadow, it's going to stay there for, I think, an hour and 13 minutes. So, and it's going to start 2 minutes from now. So why don't you help guide us a little bit on these final 2 minutes of sunlight? What are you seeing now that the rest of us should be paying attention to?
Well, this view of the moon from the United Kingdom is actually a really good one because it's very close up. And it's, again, really hard to see these things because, I mean, we're just looking at the contrast between the very, very bright little edge of the moon on the bottom there and the rest of it, which is getting darker. But if you really focus on the part that's right on the edge of that brightness, you can almost catch a bluish tinge. It's very hard to detect. I mean, it may even be something I'm just seeing because I've looked at other pictures and seen
No,
it.
no,
but
I see that too. I see that
it's
too.
it's
Absolutely,
very,
that
very
looks
faint,
bluish.
but it's there almost.
I think it's very
Okay.
distinct, but the question is if
Yeah.
you were looking at the moon directly yourself or with binoculars and not using any
Right.
photographic techniques, would it look blue? That would really be the question.
Yeah,
There's not much left
it would
of the
probably
moon. We're
take
down to
using a
the last
telescope
1
as they're
minute now.
using it here in the UK to get a very, very close-up view of it, because otherwise it would just be too much of a contrast, too distant away to really see that for yourself just with the naked eye.
Yes. And now we've got just seconds left. The moon traveling at 2,280 miles an hour. That's several times the speed of sound. It's even faster than the Concorde used to fly. And at that orbital speed around Earth, carrying it around in 27 and a third days roughly, It's about to pass into our shadow. Now we only have 30 seconds left, and then the eclipse will be fully immersed in our umbral shadow. And at that point, what we see is a big function of the kind of exposure that we give it. Now we have a number of feed partners along with our giant SLU telescopes. So look at this view, for example. In this view where the exposure is a little different so that you can't even see any trace of reddishness. Whereas if you went outside and looked at the moon right now, I can assure you, because I just did that a few minutes ago, the moon looks red. How about you, where you are, Scott, in Canada? Do you have a moon in your sky, or is it cloudy?
Unfortunately, a lot of cloud moved into southern Ontario, and so we're only seeing it in little tiny breaks between those, and we're hoping for a slightly larger break to come in, hopefully during totality, so that we can see the red moon in its full. But it's dicey at the moment, unfortunately.
And we've got it. We've diced it up. Here is, we've reached hemogenesis, the moment of the blood moon's beginning. Actually, we've been seeing it looking red, of course, as we've approached totality, but here we are. We have reached totality. Look at that yummy, scrumptious unevenness in the lighting on the moon. And this is something that is not an artifact. If you go out and look at the moon yourself, if you have clear skies, and we urge you here at SLU to glance up, even use binoculars, and see for yourself this great uneven lighting on the moon. It looks like it's not totally eclipsed. It looks as if part of the moon is still receiving full sunlight, but it is not. So why don't you explain to us again how the different parts of the atmosphere are producing this unevenness, Scott?
Well, basically, it's due to the density of the atmosphere at the different levels. So down in the troposphere, it's the densest part of the atmosphere, thickest part, and so there's more molecules of air in the way as the sunlight passes through, that it gets scattered more. And since light scatters starting at the blues and going towards the longest wavelengths, the only ones to really make it out the other side and get focused into the umbra are the oranges and the reds and the infrared, if that makes it through as well. Then after that, the higher up, there's less air there, less molecules, more light gets through. But as you go a little bit higher, that's when the ozone starts to actually capture some of those wavelengths and completely strip them out. And so that's when you get that
Wow.
blue color that can creep in on the edges.
That is so cool. And ladies,
Yeah.
women listening to that, aren't you turned on by a guy like Scott who uses words like wavelength and atmospheric density and infrared? I mean, isn't that cool? By the way, look close to the moon on the left side. You might see a single star. And in real life, the stars are now emerging. We had a night that you would not have seen the Milky Way with the light of the full moon. That does the same thing that big city lights do, destroys it. Hey, look at our live all sky view. Oh, this is so breathtaking. I'm so excited to see this. This is our view from the main observatory. A number, of course, SLU has a number of main observatories, but this is the one on the Canary Islands. And before, do you remember at the start of the show, those of you who were with us from the beginning, we saw the moon so bright that it made the background sky blue. It looked like a daytime sky. And now all the faint stars have come out. There's the moon being rather overexposed in this view so that we could get these faint stars, but there's even a hint of the Milky Way. And if you stepped out, if you live in the country right now, away from the lights of a big city, you'll actually see the Milky Way. You'll see the fainter stars. The moon is in the constellation of Pisces, a rather faint constellation. You'll see that there's no bright stars around it, but the fainter stars are all there. Whereas a mere hour and 10 minutes ago, before the eclipse started in earnest, there were very few stars out because we had the moon so bright that it was only letting the brightest of the winter or late fall stars bulldoze their way through that bright moonlight. So there's been a metamorphosis, a change in the sky, not just a change in the moon. Now we're going to come back to you in a little bit, again, live. In between, we're going to show you more views from our feed partners, more music, interviews. some other SLU astronomers and experts around the world. So we're just getting going here. So stay tuned. Stick with us. This is SLU, our coverage of the great 2015 mega moon, supermoon, blood moon, harvest moon, total eclipse. I'm Bob Berman, and back with you in a little bit. Hey, this is Bob Berman for SLU. So let's explore these strange full moons. Tonight, of course, is the harvest moon. So what does that mean? And what is the significance of all these various full moon names? Well, the full moon has always been special to civilizations through the ages. One reason is that it's the only lunar phase that's out all night long. It rises at sunset, it's at its highest around midnight, and it sets at sunrise. So it gives its light throughout the night. And on top of that, it's round. And the circle was considered the perfect shape to many early civilizations through the centuries. The size of the full moon produces another surprise. Its disk is much smaller than we commonly imagine or remember. If I were to ask you to put a value on the moon's dimensions, like how many would it take if you were going to pile them up one on top of another, starting at the horizon until you reach the overhead point, how many moons do you think it would take to stack up and go from the skyline to the zenith? Take a guess. Most people guess 30 or 50, and very few would come up with the right answer, which is 180. In other words, the moon is only a half a degree, so 180 reaches the 90 degrees that goes from the horizon to straight overhead. So the moon is actually much smaller than we remember it to be. If you wanted to completely stack the sky, pack it up with moons, it would take 105,000 moons. And none of us would guess that. In other words, the moon is much, much smaller than we perceive it to be or remember it to be. Now, for thousands of years, observers have been baffled by all sorts of lunar puzzles and paradoxes, mostly surrounding the full moon. And this happened long before Galileo aimed his first telescope at the moon in 1610. And a lot of these bizarre lunar qualities tormented the greatest minds throughout the ages. For example, there's the full moon's seeming flatness, which is noticed by the ancient Greeks. Whenever a ball, a sphere, is illuminated straight on by a light source, its center appears much brighter than the edges. Try it yourself with a ball or an orange and a flashlight. This routine effect is caused by the light being more direct and intense at the ball's center, plus the fact that only the middle of a ball is perpendicular to you and reflects more light straight back at your eyes. So the edges of a sphere always look darker, and you probably did this in drawing class, as a way to create a sense of three-dimensionality. This is such a common experience. It's a big part of what makes any globe seem three-dimensional. But the ancient Greeks noticed that, as bizarre as it seems, the full moon completely lacks this dimensionality. It seems perfectly evenly lit, as two-dimensional as a dinner plate. It looks like it's painted onto the sky. And even through telescopes, the full moon lacks any limb darkening along the edges. And it retains such a completely even lighting, it really does seem painted onto the sky. Check it out before or after this eclipse. You'll see that when you see the full moon, you'll see this effect. It's really bizarre. And after some back and forth controversy in the 1980s and 90s, scientists finally settled the matter. You see, if the moon had a smooth, solid surface or a cloudy one or a liquidy one, it would show limb darkening. Instead, the moon's powdery terrain does not scatter light in all directions, but preferentially throws it back straight toward the source, the sun. So at full moon, when you're aligned with the sun, you're looking at the moon in the same direction the sun is, so sunlight comes straight back towards all people on Earth, and it lights up the moon straight on. So the light bounces directly back toward the sun and toward us, because we're in the same direction, evenly from the entire disk, like one of those highway signs. So see it for yourself, look for it, and then compare it any other time of the month to the non-full moon, which does have dimensionality.
So full moons are special. And since there's 12 or 13 of them each year, it might be tempting to name each one. The Native American tribes did that. Most of them had names for each, for the January full moon, for the February full moon, but somehow the names never stuck. Still, sometimes on TV, you'll hear an announcer say that this coming Saturday it's the strawberry moon. But they don't tell you that no astronomer calls it that, and that's not listed in any book. And neither did any other tribe, except for the Algonquins or the Apaches or whichever tribe gave it that name. So, no, only 2 full moons have official names. There's the harvest moon, that's the one tonight, which doesn't look any different from any other full moon. People think the harvest moon is bigger or smaller or redder or something, but it isn't. The only thing special about the harvest moon, which is the full moon closest to the September equinox, is that the harvest moon rises at around the same time every night. So starting a couple of nights before the harvest moon, when the moon is almost full, instead of coming up about an hour later each night, the way the full moon normally does, the moon comes up only 20 or 25 minutes later each night. So the moon rises at more or less the same time, night after night after night, centered on the harvest moon. That's the whole special thing, and it is special. So you picture the busy farmer trying to complete his or her harvesting tasks and running out of daylight and getting frantic, and now the full moon, or nearly full moon, rises at that same time, sunset. Remember, the full moon always rises at sunset, to add welcome additional light. So that's why we call it the harvest moon. A month later, there's the hunter's moon. That's the other full moon that has an official name, which is defined as the next full moon after the harvest moon. And it has the same effect, more or less, of rising at pretty much the same time, night after night. Not quite as dramatic as the harvest moon, but almost. So those are the only full moons that have names. One of them is the harvest moon tonight. So the media, I guess, desperate for extra moons to name, have a few others. One popular one is the blue moon, a phrase that only came about in the 20th century. And it really is defined, that's pretty much accepted worldwide now. The blue moon is the second full moon in the same calendar month. Now, since the moon's period of phases from full moon to the next full moon is 29 and a half days, and since all months except for February have at least 30, if not 31 days, it means that if there's a full moon on the first of the month, or even probably on the second day of the month, there'll be another full moon at the very end of the month. And that second full moon is called a blue moon. It's not that rare. We say once in a blue moon to suggest great rarity, but a full moon happens every 2.5 years on average. Another moon that's just recently starting to be added to our vocabulary is the mega moon. This is kind of a media thing because, again, astronomers don't use that term. And it's applied to a large moon. Because of its elliptical orbit, the moon can come closer and farther away. And every year there's got to be some full moon that's the largest full moon of the year. And so the media have started calling that a mega moon. And amazingly enough, that's also happening tonight. It's the closest full moon of the entire year tonight. So, of course, everyone's calling it a mega moon. In truth, it's only 14% larger than the smallest full moon, which was back in early March, and only 7% different from the average size of the moon. And you can't really see that in the sky. The moon really looks larger when it's near the horizon, when it's rising or setting. But other than that, you can't really tell the size difference. But on paper, at least, yes, this is the largest moon of the year, so it's the mega moon. So there you have it. There are the different full moon names: harvest moon, blue moon, mega moon, and all the rest. So enjoy it. Enjoy tonight's harvest moon. For SLU, I'm Bob Berman. This is Slew. I'm Bob Berman, back with you. I've never really left.
This is
This is
all
all live, all
happening
happening in
real
real time,
being brought to you by
the Slew people, the production team headed by Trisha in the middle of Connecticut, our Slew chief engineer Paul Cox, in the British Isles, Will Gator, our Slew astronomer. We've got feed partners on 3 different continents, bringing you feeds from Africa and Europe, the Canary Islands, our main telescope in the Canary Islands, Canada, the United States. It's coming to you from all over. And thank you to the entire team and all of you and all of our partners bringing you this event. And especially all of you viewers and listeners and Slew members who are watching this. Use that tag. Slew Eclipse, S-L-O-O-H, Slew Eclipse. If you want to talk to us, make a comment, ask a question, we're here. And this is a 5-hour event, and this is the middle of it. Right now we have reached mid-totality. And that means as we look at the moon, we're going to see the most even, darkest lighting of the entire eclipse. We're going to switch from feed partner to feed partner and show you an interesting facet of it. And if you're in a place that has clear skies, we know from so many of you who have contacted us that some of you are. You're watching the eclipse, and then you're also watching our coverage of it, which is great. This is what we prefer. Some of you have cloudy weather and are just relying on Slew, and that's great too. That makes us feel great that we can bring it to you in a way that you would not have seen it at all otherwise. So no matter what, as long as you're here, we're grateful for that. And so look at these different views. This is Ontario, Canada, that is struggling with intermittent clouds. Look at the color. I want you to compare the views from our different feed partners, because the identical event, I mentioned this before, but it bears repeating, is seen by the entire world. This is such a unitary, uniting event. When do we have so many people, let's hope over 1 billion people, watching the same thing, enjoying it, seeing an effect of our own planet, casting our shadow on the moon, our one and only natural satellite. So important for life on Earth. We used to think that it was important certainly for sea life, especially the creatures that rely on the tides, the rise and fall of the oceans, especially in the intertidal marshes, crabs, animals like that. They're predators like gulls. But now we know that life itself depends on having the moon, because Earth's tilt would change radically in ways that would make Earth too hot for many hundreds of thousands of years at a time. Were it not for the moon's stabilizing effect on our tilt, keeps it from tilting more than 2 degrees, more or less than its present 23.5 degrees. So this is a part of the scheme, the system, the architecture, the design, whether you believe nature itself is intelligent. I suppose you could also believe that it's all a random design, whatever it is. We're happy for it. We're grateful that we have what we have. We're going to be seeing another viewpoint when we have an interview with the Vatican astronomer spokesperson coming up soon on the show. Hey, look at this view. This is from South Africa. One of our feed partners showing you the moon looking quite dark. I'd say it's almost a brownish red in this. Notice that the lighting on the edge is now less pronounced than it was before. We're at mid-eclipse, which means the moon is most centrally inside Earth's main shadow, the umbral shadow right now. If you were a pessimist, we might call it the darkest, gloomiest part of the eclipse. An optimist, if you're away from the lights of any city, you can now see the splendors of the Milky Way and all the faint stars that were hidden from view during the full moon that preceded this. A lunar eclipse can only happen at the moment of full moon. Just so happens that not only is this the full moon, it's also the harvest moon. We've already talked to you about what makes the harvest moon so special. It doesn't look different from other moons. Some people imagine that the harvest moon is bigger or smaller, or redder, more orange, something. No. Harvest moons look the same as any other full moon. The whole big deal with that
is defining it as the full moon closest to the autumn equinox on September 23rd means that it's going to rise and set most nearly due west and due east, but more importantly, that means that it rises at most nearly the same time night after night. Usually the full moon, or any phase of the moon, comes up about 50-55 minutes later per night, almost an hour later each night, but not the harvest moon. The harvest moon rises only 20 minutes later each night. It really depends on your latitude. The farther north you go, or the farther south, the farther you go away from the equator, the more extreme the harvest moon effect becomes. So the harvest moon is more of an effect than a physical appearance. So if you're up in Canada, Alaska especially, or you get down to southernmost Australia or New Zealand, now you're going to see it coming up only 10 minutes later per night, almost the same time night after night. From Alaska, let's say the middle of Alaska, Fairbanks, at this time, the time of harvest moon, if you look up the times of moonrise, it can actually rise earlier the next night than it did the night before. Truly weird. That's weird stuff. The moon coming up early hour, night after night. So all these strange effects are associated with the harvest moon. So tonight we have the harvest moon, always a full moon by definition. Going into Earth shadow, only a full moon can go into Earth shadow. So far that's not so weird. It's unusual, but not weird. At the same hour, and that was this hour, between 10 and 11 o'clock. We're there now, at the moon's closest approach to Earth in all of 2015. Now, it's only 14% larger than the very smallest full moon back on March 5th. It's not a big change, and if you've been one of the lucky ones with clear skies that have looked at the moon in the sky, can you really say that it's a larger looking moon? I'll bet you can't. If you saw it rise, that's another story, because when it's low down, you get the moon illusion, then it looks larger. But right now, look for it, and I think you'll honestly say that it looks like any other full moon. So all the talk about a supermoon, a hypermoon, a mega moon, and we're calling it that too. Look on your screen, because everyone is, even NASA is calling it a supermoon or a mega moon. But honestly speaking, when you look at it, it looks like any other moon, because the human eye cannot see a 14% difference. And the deviation from average is only 7%. It's just not large enough to perceive. The other thing, of course, it's called is the blood moon. We all know that. But look at the color. Even on this image from Ontario, Canada, it's more orange than red. I think we'd all agree. And if you go out and look at it yourself, you'll see it maybe looking a little differently, and that brings up the question, which is real? The one that you see in the sky, maybe even using binoculars. Ordinary binoculars are great, by the way, on this moon. Or the various images that we have from our feed partners. And you'll notice the colors are a little different in each one. Well, the answer is what you see is the real moon. Because any exposure that we take is going to change with the vagaries of the camera, the equipment, and the type of exposure. Like, look at this image now from the United Kingdom. Here, we wanted to get an optimum exposure, and we're grateful for the Basingstoke Astronomical Society bringing us these live images all in real time. And notice it's maximally exposed to capture that redness on the limb of the moon, but that means the center of the moon is underexposed. Compare this to what you would see if you went outside right now, is you'd see the entire moon glowing with an orange color, with one edge looking brighter than the rest. That edge is the part of the moon that's farthest from the center of Earth's umbral shadow. Earth is just about 8,000 miles in diameter, and our shadow tapers smaller and smaller, and when it reaches the moon a 250,000 miles away, it has tapered to a size that's still quite a bit larger than the moon, but smaller than the original Earth. So because of that, it's about twice the diameter of the moon. So once the moon is in the shadow, it'll stay there for about a full hour. And that's what we're seeing. We're in totality. It's lasting for an hour and 13 minutes. We're in
We're
the
in the mid part of that now, which means we're seeing the most even lighting on the moon, the least weird, the least deviation in color. Check it out yourself. As I say, if it's clear, look for the difference between the brightest and the dimmest part of the moon, and tell us what you think about the color. How would you assess it? To our eyes here, I was just outside taking a look myself. I would say it looks orangey, coppery orange colored, not day glow like this image from Ontario, Canada. Again, there's no wrong or right. It just has to do with the kind of exposure. It's certainly uneven lighting. We expected that. Nowhere did it get to blood color, that is a deep red, traffic light red, or stop sign red, or fire engine red. I think at all times we would agree it's more like something in between coppery red like a penny and an orangey color. It's very cool to see the difference from eclipse to eclipse. In 1992, we had a total lunar eclipse that happened after a major volcanic eruption on Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines, and that threw so much dust in the air that very little light got refracted or bent into Earth's shadow. And because of that, the moon's was very, very dark. It almost vanished during that eclipse. So we can have lunar eclipses that are almost black. We can have lunar eclipses, rare ones that are barely eclipsed at all, that'll look just ever so slightly pink, very, very light colored. And it's really an environmental report card about ourselves. So it's really a unifying event. Not only is Earth watching this, not only are we all seeing the same thing, and even more than this being the harvest moon, the closest moon of the year, boy, we're all connected watching this. But on top of that, we're observing the effects of our own atmosphere on the moon, because it's light bent around the edge of Earth that's hitting the moon. And if we were very polluted, very little light would get there. If it's very cloudy along the Earth's limb or edge, very little light would reach the moon. What we're seeing here is a normal looking total lunar eclipse. So it's kind of reassuring. You know, everything's okay in the universe. It is as it should be. Earth's air is not unusually polluted. We're seeing things just perfectly. This also concludes what's called a tetrad. And many people are making a lot out of that, and it's kind of unusual in a way. You see, once you have an eclipse, an eclipse can only happen when the exact three-dimensional plane of the sun and the earth and the moon are in a straight line. That can next happen 6 months later. But 6 months later, the next eclipse doesn't have to be full, and usually is not. It can be a partial eclipse where the moon doesn't quite make it into the center of its shadow. Or it can be a penumbral eclipse where the moon really skims the edge of the shadow. But what if you get a total eclipse again 6 months later? Well, then what about 6 months after that? Can you get another one? You can. It's rare, but you could. And then what about a fourth? That's the most you could ever get. If you do get four total lunar eclipses in a row, as close together as they can possibly be, that is every 6 months, that's called a tetrad. Now, there were no tetrads at all. From the year 1600 to the year 1900. 3 centuries, no tetrads. So this is the fourth and final eclipse of this tetrad. So if you put it into historical perspective, it's very rare. It's not just the mega moon, it's not just the harvest moon. It's not just the largest moon of the year that's going into eclipse, but it's also the final and, of course, most important member of the tetrad. However, just so we don't think that, again, it's Armageddon or the end of the world, because of the tick-tock motion of celestial mechanics or geometry, there are a number of tetrads in our lifetimes. In the 21st century, there are 8 sets of tetrads. So when seen in that light, tetrads are not so terribly rare. Still, it's interesting enough to deserve mention. So I thought I'd just tell you what that tetrad business is all about, and that this indeed is the fourth and final member of the tetrad.
I'm going to
I'm going
be
to
back
be
again.
back again. We're going to be exploring various aspects of the eclipse. We're going to come on with other slew astronomers. We'll have our interview and great music accompanied. Please continue to send us hashtag slew eclipse, comment, ask us questions, anything about that. We'll keep watching because totality still has a while to go. This is the deepest part of it, but we're going to watch it progress. This very active, animated, alive kind of organic thing, this eclipse. So we're here. It's 5 hours of coverage, and so we're going to continue. I'll be back with you in a little bit. For Slew, I'm Bob Berman.
Hello, and thanks for joining us here on SLU for the Mega Harvest Moon Eclipse. I'm Trisha Ennis, the producer here, and today I'm taking us on a tour of a brand new feature here on SLU, the Golden Record, a place for us to come together to share stories, photos, art, and even poetry, all surrounding the universe and our place in it. Being so close to the Earth and so much more changeable than the Sun with its many phases, changing size, and effect on the tides, and if you believe the rumors on people and animals, it's no surprise that the moon would have a place in the hearts of poets. There are plenty of songs and poems about the moon, some of which have made their way onto the Golden Record, and a couple that I want to share with you today. First up, we're probably all familiar in some way with Emily Dickinson and her interesting relationship with capital letters. In the mid-19th century, she wrote a poem called The Moon is Distant from the Sea, a short piece that speaks of the moon and its command over the sea, as if from two lovers. The moon is distant from the sea, and yet with amber hands she leads him, docile as a boy, along appointed sands. He never misses a degree. Obedient to her eye, he comes just so far toward the town, just so far goes away. O Signor, thine an amber hand, and mine the distant sea, obedient to the least command, thine eye imposed on me. That poem has been read and arranged many times over the years and has even become a song performed by choirs. You can listen to one of those arrangements on the Golden Record right now. Just go to SLU's homepage to find it. But of course, this is an eclipse, and the drama of something like tonight has certainly inspired poets on its own. Poets like Thomas Hardy, who wrote this piece called At the Lunar Eclipse. Thy shadow, Earth, from pole to central sea, now steals along upon the moon's meek shine, in even monochrome and curving line of imperturbable serenity. How shall I link such sun-cast symmetry with the torn, troubled form I know is thine, that profile placid as a brow divine, with continents of moil misery? And can immense mortality but throw so small a shade, and heaven's high human scheme be hemmed within the coasts yon arc implies? Is such the stellar gauge of earthly show, nation at war with nation, brains that teem, heroes, and women fairer than the skies? These are just a few of the many selections that you can find online, in poetry books, everywhere, of artists connecting themselves with the things they see in the night sky, and expressing confusion about their own lives here on Earth with metaphor about the moon and the sun and the stars. If you know of any and you'd like to add them to the Golden Record, all SLU members are actually able to log in right now. Just go to SLU's homepage and click on the Golden Record link, and you can see all of the many things that we've added to it, and of course add your own. We'd like to see you there.
Well, hello, my friends.
We're back.
We're back.
Actually, we've
always been here.
This
This is live coverage
of
of
great
the great
mega
harvest moon eclipse here at SLU.
Bringing
We've been bringing you
from
feeds from
all over the world,
all over the world,
untold
countries, continents, and all sorts of things. I hope you've
enjoyed that
golden record and the poetry as much as I have. And the people in the production end of things in Central Connecticut are love what they're doing. So hopefully you've enjoyed this as we now approach the end of totality. We have just a few minutes left. We're counting it down, a little under 6 minutes for that. And to discuss this, let's bring in our friend from England. We're going to go back to Will Gator, who has been outdoors. Is the moon still up? It must be getting low in the west for you there, right?
Yeah. It's getting low in the west. It's the limb is actually brightening now. It's been it was a very dark totality. I thought. Much darker than I can remember the last one I saw in 2007. So.
Yes, I quite agree. During mid-eclipse, that was a yummy, nice,
the moon was fully there, blanketed, nice and cozy.
And now we're getting that uneven lighting again as we prepare for the edge of the moon to come out into the sunlight at last. So tell me more of your impressions there from England while you watch this.
Bob, this is the face of, an astronomer who lives in Britain, where usually it's cloudy. I'm just absolutely over the moon. It was just stunning. I mean, my neighbours have been out. We've been looking through binoculars. It's been just extraordinary. And I think just seeing the reaction online, people on the hashtag and on social media, and just watching this footage, it's just been incredible and wonderful that we've had clear skies over what seems like quite a large portion here in the UK. I don't know about the rest of Europe, but just a really magical few hours this has been, and just it's one of those things that really does make you aware of your place in the universe. I think. I don't know what you think, Bob.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you and I both know that a total solar eclipse, and SLU brings them all to you. That requires expeditions to very small places of Earth. They are knock you backward event that brings tears to people's eyes, and much harder to see. Only lasts a few minutes. This is a lunar eclipse, and this is the vox populi of astronomy events, because everyone who has the moon in their sky is seeing this. So this is more of a unifying, global, worldwide. Let's all dig this at the same moment together, regardless of our time zone. So I second what you say. Absolutely, it just feels great. Give me more impressions, Will.
I had a pair of 10 by 50 binoculars with me tonight, and I wasn't. I mean, we've already touched on the fact that it was a very dark eclipse, but I was basically stargazing around the constellation of Pisces. I mean, it was ridiculously dark. The Milky Way was. We had a little bit of thin cloud that came over at the beginning of totality, but actually, for most of the last bit of totality, very clear skies. The Milky Way very clear. I'm kicking myself now. I forgot to actually see if I could see Andromeda, the Andromeda Galaxy with the naked eye. I meant to do that, but I was being preoccupied with getting some pictures. But it was just magical, and also some of the things that I don't know whether you got to see it or whether you saw it, but I was looking out for that classic turquoise edge, the sort of blue edge that you sometimes get from stratospheric ozone. It absorbs red light, and you get this lovely sort of turquoisey edge. Didn't think I saw as strong as one as we have seen in previous years. I don't know what you thought.
No, I didn't see that with the eye. You certainly didn't see that. Also, one has to be wary of that because remember the complementary color to red is blue or blue-green. So when you're looking from the red part of the moon to the other, you have to be careful. Some old astronomy books list the companion of Antares as a green star. Now we know there are no green stars. So why did these venerable astronomers see it as green? We know the answer. They looked at the main A member of the pair, saw it as distinctly ruddy, and then when they turned their gaze to the white companion, they projected green onto it. So we always have to be careful with that. But I quite agree with your perception of this. Very, very nice eclipse. When we see a total solar eclipse, of course, totality, those precious few minutes, brings phenomena such as the corona going across the sky and other things. You look for other things other than that blacked out sun. You look for things around the sun and in the sky adjacent to it, like the corona. Well, usually in lunar totality, you don't think about that. You think about, well, you're going to look on the moon, you're going to look for the redness, you're going to look for the uneven lighting. But quite right. What you can do if you're not in a bright city is you can look for the surrounding stars and watch the magical transformation of the full moon night to a night where suddenly the beautiful, serene Milky Way and all the faint stars briefly have returned. And lovely.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't really thought about it in that sort of way, but you're absolutely right, aren't you? I often think in total solar eclipses, there's that sort of the last 10 minutes before totality, you get that ethereal silver glow, don't you? Well, we sometimes you hear people talking about lunar eclipses being not quite as spectacular, but actually, it's quite something to see the full moon. When I started out this evening, all around me was bathed in the beautiful silver blue moonlight, and then of course it's not there, and I'm looking around now, and actually, it's not. It's dark here right now, apart from the lights that I've got lighting me up. So, I think there is this drama if you know where to look, or you're willing to sort of go and seek it out.
Well, that tells me, I've never been to your house, and since you're expecting a baby any time, nor will I get invited probably because you'll have less of a guest room than you had before. But this tells me you're not in. I knew you were not in London, but you're not in an area that totally washes out the sky, are you?
Not quite. I'm actually on the edge of a sort of suburban zone, but I'm quite lucky in that I actually look out over fields, farmland. So, there's no real major sort of direct sources of lights. All the street lights are hidden behind buildings. So, quite lucky in that respect.
And here we are. The countdown to zero has hit it, and now the total part of the eclipse is over. And that doesn't mean that it's inferior, because now we go through real strange changes where the phases in reverse of what we had before, as the moon continues to creep half a degree per hour through the constellation of Pisces fish. As it does so, it emerges from the shadow, but it also displays those strange-looking shapes and lighting. And just look at this image that we have here. This is from New Hampshire in the United States. And there are some, granted, there have to be some artifacts in capturing such a great range of brightness. So we're looking from white on one end to almost red, you could say, on the upper left. It's still an orange red. It's not really a blood red or a stop sign red, but it's still close to red on the upper left, yellow in between. And so I'm interested in all of our SLU members and observers around the world looking at the moon at this moment. What do you see? What is the range of strange lighting and strange shapes that you're actually seeing yourself? And how does it compare with these many SLU partners and views that we're bringing you?
We was talking about the end of the umbral phase, the sort of the moon's sort of starting to peak out. And I'm looking around, and there's almost kind of like like a sort of diamond ring effect. The moon is so dark on that right-hand side. As I look at it, the bit that is actually sticking out is really quite pronounced. Maybe what was the name you gave it, Bob? The hema something?
A hemogenesis. That's the start, the
beginning, the birth of the red part. But now this is the end of it, so now we need another Latin phrase for the for we'll look for when the red part is over. In other words, when our eyes, when our cameras, when our CCDs, in trying to capture the moon correctly, when there's so much moon that has returned, all bathed in sunlight, that the cameras have to be stopped down, and we underexpose the red, and it becomes black again. And maybe the name for that would be the onset of darkness, rather than putting it in the negative at the end of the redness, maybe the beginning of darkness. Although that does sound a little morbid, doesn't it? It's like
Sounds like a film title, I think. Look at that view. That's
right.
gorgeous.
And so look at that, the full sky view from the Canary Islands and the main slew, one of the main slew observatories. We're not going to see this much longer. It's going to be a lot of fun an hour from now when the full moon is back. You won't see those stars. You'll see a blue sky. People don't realize it, but the full moon actually does paint the sky blue. We can perceive it as a dark blue to the eye, but when we use CCDs or film, it brightens it up like the daytime sky. So goodbye to Orion and the dog star to its lower left, and all these lovely stars and their lovely colors. True colors. This is showing you bringing you the all-sky view in true color of the onset of the winter sky. Very arguably the brightest part in all the heavens. Even a faint trace of the Milky Way above Orion right now, and that will go bye as that moon brightens up.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to contrast the colours of Betelgeuse there in the top left of Orion, see how orangey it is, and the moon there. They look quite similar on my screen that I'm looking at.
They do. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And yeah, notice as long as we're talking about star colors, looking at this all sky, notice that you can see bluish white. The bottom star of Orion, Rigel, is bluish white. The dog star Sirius is bluish white. We see the not really red, but again kind of an orangey, yellow-orange of both Betelgeuse and to its right Aldebaran, but no green. Stars come in every color except for green. There's even black stars and brown stars. There's even one arguably purple star, and that one I invite you to look at the next time you're using your telescope. We're going to come to that season before long, where you can look at the lovely Cor Caroli, the alpha star of Canis Venatici, and its companion, the B star, is this odd color that you'll see in various texts as amber, yellow, topaz, blue, purple. It's all over the place. I've always seen it as purple, however. So there may even be purple stars, but no green stars. That's the one color we don't have. There's a good reason for it, and the stars obey that law. No obvious green stars. And I agree with you. That moon looks like, with that ruddy color that's still being thrown onto the moon, looks like it matches Betelgeuse very nicely, that star in Orion.
It is getting lighter though, isn't it? There's a real slither now. It looks like, if I just glance behind me, it just looks like a crescent moon now. If I just glance, it's really quite beautiful. Really beautiful. I think we're soon going to lose that lovely red colour.
Now, it's got to be awfully late for you there in the British Isles, isn't it?
It is just coming up to 4:30 in the morning.
So now are you practicing for the baby that you're going to have soon? Is that what's going on here?
Absolutely. I haven't started into the hobnobs yet. Once I get started into eating those biscuits, that'll see me through to the end.
So here we are at SLU. We've been bringing you this eclipse from the beginning, even from the beginning of the penumbral part. We've watched the subtle shading of the moon. We've watched the moon having a black bite taken out of it. We've discussed the harvest moon, the mega moon, all the different lore and legend and mythology and science surrounding it during this really marvelous event. I'd say it has gone as splendidly or more so than we could have hoped. We had wonderful hashtag SLU Eclipse tweets and messages from all over the world from people that have been enjoying it with us, either because they had clouds and this was the only way they could see it here at SLU, or because they were doing both, which is really warms the cockles of our hearts to know that they're taking it in directly as well as joining us here for it. That's just marvelous. We're going to continue with this coverage, bring you some more stuff, and an interesting interview coming up, and looking at various aspects of it as we continue to watch in real time, live, the moon creeping out of Earth's shadow at a hefty speed, 2,280 miles an hour. So no slouch, and that's the actual orbital motion as it leaves our shadow for good, our final eclipse of this tetrad. So Will, thank you so much for being part of this as our SLU astronomer and hosts many of the shows that we do here. And so we'll be back. We're always here live, but we'll be back and talk to you again in a little bit. I'm Bob Berman. That's Will Gator. And this is SLU.